Well, welcome. It's good to see everybody this morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia. Our minister is the Reverend Stephen Robinson. My name is Jessica Cross, and I am your service leader this morning. On those Sundays when Stephen is not in the pulpit, such as today, we present a variety of interesting speakers from this congregation or those people widely recognized for their expertise from the wider community. To those of you here with us in the sanctuary, please be advised that the service is being streamed on YouTube. To those of you watching this streamed service, we're glad to have you watching, but would of course rather you were here with us in person. Please make sure that you read the announcements in your printed order of service. Also be sure to read the weekly events that are emailed to you each Thursday, as well as the unigram and the website. So if you're paying attention at all, there's no excuse for not knowing what's going on. I urge you to keep the website open as a tab on your internet browser so you can keep up with what's happening. Please practice the COVID restrictions that are currently in place as approved by the Board of Trustees. Current guidelines are that we practice social distancing and that wearing a mask is highly recommended but not required, except when singing. An announcement for parents, I guess, if you need to occupy your young folks, we have toys and books in the back of the social hall. That's behind the barrier, the green barrier there. Today's flowers are provided by Susan Legacy in honor of her son Matthew, who died 2.5 years ago from an accidental drug overdose. He would have been 49 yesterday. He is so greatly missed by his family and friends. And now, please silence all of your electronic devices as we center ourselves for today's service and listen to the prelude.
It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our Bill Moody Performance Fund guest musician. Julia Jacobson is a resident of Columbia, and she's a junior in the Honors College at USC Columbia. She studies as a violin performance major and as a marketing major at the Darla Moore School of Business. She previously attended the South Carolina Governor's School for the Arts and Humanities, where she studied violin. She's attended several summer festivals, such as the Spoleto Festival, National Symphony Orchestra Summer Music Institute, the Interlochen Violin Institute, and the Piccolo Spoleto Rising Stars series, as well as the Dakota Chamber Music Festival. Now she's a substitute violinist for the South Carolina Philharmonic and Aiken Symphony, and plays with several other orchestras in the Carolinas. She's performed at venues such as Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, the Peace Center, the Koger Center for the Arts. She also works as a marketer for the Boulanger Initiative, the U of SC Symphony, and the U of SC School of Music. Julia has made it her mission to bring full diversity, equity, and accessibility to the classical music industry through her performing and arts marketing.
The first selection I'll be playing for you today is a movement by Johann Sebastian Bach in his third partita in E major for solo violin. It's a very serene movement that I feel that will really put you at ease in a lot of ways, and I think is perfect to start off your Sunday morning. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Julia. Lovely. We now have our congregational affirmation. Please stand if you so choose. And we'll speak in unison. It's in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community. Thus do we covenant with one another. Thank you. Please be seated. Unitarian Universalism is a diverse and non-creedal religion. We are a covenantal religion, which means that we don't have to believe the same in order to treat each other with respect, equity, compassion, and dignity. Our community is based on deeds, not creeds. As Unitarian Universalists, we side with love, embracing all people, regardless of age, color, race, socioeconomic status, physical ability, or religious background. We have been officially designated by the Unitarian Universalist Association as a welcoming congregation that welcomes LGBTQ+ individuals. We especially invite families and young children. We even have a nursery. We encourage everyone to wear name tags so that we may know each other better. Board members wear green name tags, and they always welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions. Would the members of our Board of Trustees please stand now so that you may be recognized, and we know who to target. Thank you. At this time, we would like to recognize any guests or visitors who are with us today. So visitors, if you are willing and able, please rise and share with us your name and where you are from. Or if you have guests with us, please feel free to introduce them. Please wait for the microphone, which Amelia will bring with you, to you. Are there any guests? There we go.
Hi, I'm Bill Huckabee. I'm Lydia's dad. So, welcome.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Chima, and my wife Sana took us in the back with our daughter Kala. It's our second visit. We live very close by in 5 Points, so thank you all for welcoming us.
Welcome.
Welcome, Jeff. Anybody else? Thank you, Amelia. Visitors, please fill out a visitor card and put it in the collection plate. There should be one in the back of a chair in front of you. That information will enable us to send you our newsletter and emails. No one will come knocking on your door. That's a promise. Though we're still under COVID restrictions, let's everyone take a moment to greet each other, turn to those in front or back or beside you, and offer a pleasant greeting and maybe a handshake or fist bump, along with a big smile under your mask. And now for one of our big events, but only one. We have many big events. Our chalice lighting. And our chalice lighters are going to introduce themselves.
Hello.
Hello.
I need it little down. Okay. No, I want this down, please.
Say your name.
It's a little bit too loud.
A little bit too loud. It's okay, Lexi. You go ahead. You can go ahead.
Say your name.
Have you got that?
All right. It's okay. It's a lot. Here you go.
Hello, my name's Lucille, and that's Roxanne, and that's Artemis, and my favorite color is gold. Yeah.
Say your name.
Okay, and mom is?
I am Lydia Ureta, and the mother of these 3 girls.
Very good.
All right.
All right, the magnificent threesome plus one.
Okay, that's good. You did good.
Are we okay? No.
Almost there.
There you go. Good job.
Ah, very good. Very good.
Maya, I didn't say something.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Spirit of light and life, come unto us. And we now have a musical meditation.
Today is a piece by Grażyna Bacewicz. She was a Polish composer from the early to mid 20th century, and part of my work with the Boulanger Initiative, which is an organization that promotes women composers of all kinds, is that we do lots of research into these composers and try to share their music as widely as possible. And I found this really wonderful piece by Grażyna Bacewicz that is very exciting and people often associate with fireworks. So I think you will really enjoy this one as well.
Thank you, Julia. That should wake us up, if nothing else. Your order of service says that next in line is the introduction of the guest speaker, but I'm not going to do that yet. I would prefer to introduce our guest speaker just before he speaks. And so we will just continue on with other things, and then after I introduce our guest speaker, we will have the pleasure of hearing our guest speaker and not me. So, our opening words this morning are from the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is probably the oldest of what we think are texts from the Buddha's words. The Buddha did not write anything down. And this is number 1, and it's called Choices. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. So, a story for all ages. So the story for all ages is for children to come down in front if they would like to, and anybody else of any age to come down in front if they would like to. And if nobody likes to, we will have the story anyway. But I will come down in the front and we'll see what there is to see. I just barely fit. So, here we go. We have all ages. So I'd like to start with just a little story, and then we're going to have some call and response maybe. And our story is from the Rabbi Hillel. The Rabbi Hillel lived about 100 years before the Common Era, so like really a long time ago, right? 2,200 years ago or whatnot. And he was asked by a doubter if he could sum up his religion, if he could sum up the Torah while standing on one foot. And the Rabbi Hillel said, yes. You shall treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, and all the rest is commentary. Now, this might sound familiar, to treat people as we would want to be treated. And so what I thought is that I would say some statements, and you will say, no, that's how we treat everybody. So your part is to say, no, that's how we treat everybody. So, do we treat little old ladies who were sitting in front here like we want to be treated, but nobody else? No. We want to treat everybody. We want to treat everybody like we want to be treated. How about we only treat people under 12 as we want to be treated? No. Come on, no. Get everybody. How about we will only treat people as we want to be treated who have red hair? No. Not we treat everybody. And do we treat anybody who just looks like ourselves well?
No. That's how we treat everybody.
And as the Rabbi Hillel said, we treat people the way we want to be treated, and all the rest is commentary. Thank you. And that is our story. That is our story. One of the traditions of this community are candles that we light for joys and concerns that we wish to share. If you have any significant joy or sorrow, concern you would like to share from the pulpit, please phone or email Andrea, our administrator, by noon Friday. If you would like to speak for yourself, before the service begins, pick up one of the candles in the basket on the entry table and come forward to speak briefly when requested. For those of you streaming, if you would like to have a candle lit, please text or email Andrea, our administrator, to have it read during the service. So this week we will start with John Storino. John Storino lights a candle of remembrance for his wife and partner, Maria Addie Storino, who would have celebrated with him their 39th wedding anniversary yesterday, October 1st. Maria is on his mind for her sense of humor, life-saving work she performed as a special care nurse with Lexington Medical, and memories of their wedding day. Even though they did not get a balloon ride, John and Maria were married during 1983 Albuquerque International Hot Air Balloon Fiesta. So metaphorically speaking, their party favors were brightly colored envelopes which dotted the skyline. Don?
Anna Espinosa is now on her way to Florida with 2 generators for her brother who lives in Port St. Lucie. And when last seen, there were 3 feet of water around his house. My older brother lives in Naples, in an area where there are 4 to 7 feet of water. We haven't heard from him. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm not good at that.
Thank you. Ivy and Robin?
We'd like to light a candle for 2 members of Ivy's family, her father, who has been, sorry? Okay, all right. I'm gonna light the candle, she's gonna talk.
Sorry, no lack of communication. So I'm not a dramatic person, but I've had a dramatic month. I have my father, and I guess it goes back, I'm kind of a daddy's girl, and my dad was admitted to MUSC back on Labor Day. And so we had a nice 8-day stay, mostly in ICU. He's got a failing heart, and it's kind of complicated, but he was septic, and we were surprised when we were able to take him home after 8 days, but he wasn't stable. And not to be outdone, my brother got admitted on Thursday to MUSC, septic and kidney failure, which has never been a problem for him, but it's an issue now. So he's in the MICU still with multi-organ failure and not doing well, and spiked a fever overnight. So he's kind of a little jerk, big jerk. And my feelings for him are complicated, but I love my brother. And so I hate to see this happen to him. And then, of course, during his stay, my dad was readmitted and got discharged again. And then we got a call that his leukemia is back. So it's kind of, rain, when it rains, it pours. And then we had a storm, but luckily we were spared most of it. Unfortunately, others weren't. But that's what's on our hearts today. And thank goodness for Robin.
I just wanted to quickly add that Ivy's brother's actually been in MUSC since like the 15th, so it was a Thursday, but it was like 2.5 weeks ago, so he's pretty critical. Thanks.
This is another candle about the storm. We've heard from the UUA that the UU Church in Fort Myers suffered some severe damage, and many of their parishioners have lost homes, etc. And then Venice congregation closed today because they had no power. So let's keep others in our thoughts, and especially those we know, but also everyone. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Chuck Ashley, and I'm from the Vietnam War era, as I know a bunch of you are. I have an older brother who served in Vietnam. I have a father who served in Vietnam. So Vietnam was a very real thing for me and my family. This week is my older brother's 71st birthday, and it's not a happy birthday, it's another birthday for him to endure. He endures his birthdays every year. He endures Christmas every year. He endures everything every year. My brother was a combat soldier in Vietnam, and he was in the jungles when our country decided the thing to do was to spray it with Agent Orange, which was a defoliant, to cut through all the jungles so that they could see the enemy down there. Unfortunately, a bunch of our men were down there too. My brother was one of those men who were down there. And for the past 50 years, all of his adult life, actually, he's been dying a little bit every day. He's been bitter, he's been angry, he's been alone, he's been in exile, he's lived in Florida of his own choice, away from his family. All the rest of us live here. He lives there where we can't just go to him. I hate it for him. I wish he could die. He wishes he could die. He wants nothing more than to die. But unfortunately, he's going to have to get through another birthday, and it's this Wednesday. So here's my brother, Corporal USMC, combat veteran, Michael Sargent.
We light one last candle for those joys and concerns which remain in our hearts. To ponder these joys and concerns, let us pause for a moment of silent meditation. It is now time to share our abundance. This congregation contributes to Share the Plate, where half of our cash collection each Sunday goes to local charities, a way for us to give back to the community we live in. This month's Share the Plate recipient is Cotton Branch Farm Animal Sanctuary. Is Josh Carpenter Costner here? Okay, hopefully he'll be here next week to tell you more about Cotton Branch. Cotton Branch takes in farm animals that aren't wanted anymore. And often these are animals that nobody thinks very much about. We think about dogs and cats, and I just saw in the newspaper that we think about guinea pigs. But larger animals, animals that perhaps are a little bit outside our view, tend to be hidden. If contributing by check, please write "Share the Plate" on the memo line, or you may make an online contribution. Those of you who are streaming certainly can contribute. You'll find the link on the UUCC website, uucolumbia.org. Will the ushers please come forward? We receive these gifts with gratitude and appreciation, as it demonstrates that we are truly a giving community. I would now like to introduce our speaker. I will start with a point of privilege. I was teaching at the university when Bobby Donaldson first came there, and I had the opportunity to observe some of his classes, because we did that when we were trying to decide whether to keep people or whether to give them raises or whether just to sort of do whatever we would normally do. We won't mention what that might be. And Bobby Donaldson was certainly one of the most impressive people that I ever had to observe. So kudos. Professor Bobby Donaldson, the executive director of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research, and an associate professor of history at the University of South Carolina. A native of Augusta, Georgia, Dr. Donaldson serves as an associate professor, the executive director of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research at the University of South Carolina. He received his undergraduate degree in history and African American studies from Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and his PhD in history from Emory. Dr. Donaldson's teaching and scholarship examines Southern history and African American life and culture in the 19th and 20th centuries. He serves as the lead scholar and director for the Columbia SC 63, a documentary project that examines the struggle for civil rights and social justice in Columbia and around the state of South Carolina. During the course of his academic career, he served as a Benjamin E. Mays Andrew Mellon Fellow, an editorial assistant for the Martin Luther King Jr. Papers Project at Emory and Stanford Universities, as a Thurgood Marshall Dissertation Fellow and visiting assistant professor at Dartmouth College, as a fellow of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research at Harvard University, and as the faculty principal of Preston Residential College at the University of South Carolina. Prior to his tenure at Preston, he held a joint position in the African American Studies program and served as a founding member of the Institute for African American Research. Professor Donaldson has received the University of South Carolina's Distinguished Michael J. Mungo Undergraduate Teaching Award, the John N. Gardner Inspirational Faculty Award, the Martin Luther King Jr. Social Justice Award. In 2017, he was awarded the Stephen Morrison Visionary Award for the One Columbia for Arts and History organization. He received the South Carolina Governor's Award in Historic Preservation and the South Carolina Governor's Humanities Award. In 2019, Dr. Donaldson's teaching, research, and community engagement were recognized by the South Carolina House of Representatives. He was awarded an honorary degree by Benedict College. Dr. Donaldson's memberships include the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the Organization of American Historians, the Southern Historical Association, the South Carolina Archives and History Commission, the editorial board of the University of South Carolina Press, the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission, the South Caroliniana Society, the NAACP, the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, the Sigma Pi Phi Fraternity, and the Wesleyan University Board of Trustees. He and his wife are the proud parents of 2 children, and in all of that, I don't see how he has time to get anything done. Dr. Donaldson.
Good morning, everyone. I am delighted and honored to be here once again. And I want to thank my colleague, longtime colleague, Jessica Cross, for the very generous introduction and for being a part of that cadre of faculty who allowed me to get tenure at the University of South Carolina. In absence of your minister, Stephen Robinson, I am also glad to be here. Today is my 3rd time speaking at the Unitarian Universalist congregation. The last time I spoke here was on Sunday, June 14th, 2015. During that presentation, I spoke on a similar topic. The title that day was Hush, Somebody's Calling My Name. Today, I have given title to what I wish to offer you as Justice for All, South Carolina and the American Civil Rights Movement. This title is drawn from an exhibit that is currently traveling across South Carolina. In 2019, there was at the Ernest F. Hollings Special Collections Library an exhibit that I co-curated with undergraduate and graduate students that explored about 60 different collections in our archive. And we pulled together photographs, letters, oral interviews, newspapers, moving footage from the 1960s to showcase what occurred in South Carolina, not Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia or Tennessee, but in South Carolina. That exhibit was on display in the Hollings Special Collections Library for 6 months. And in August of 2019, we had the unfortunate task of closing that exhibit, taking all of this material, putting them back in their folders, back in boxes, and back in the archives. But as we were doing that, there were several people who had a chance to see the exhibit who came to me and said, "That's unacceptable. This collection, this exhibit must live." And so we developed a digital version of the exhibit, which you can find on the website of the Center for Civil Rights History and Research at the university. We also developed a traveling tour of some aspects of this exhibit called Columbia SC 63, Our Story Matters, which is a guided tour about civil rights in downtown Columbia. In addition, we developed a traveling exhibit. The exhibit's first stop was at the Sumter County Museum. Its second stop was back here in Columbia at the Martin Luther King Jr. Park, not far from where we are today, and presently it is in Orangeburg. At the end of November, it leaves Orangeburg and goes to Hartsville, from Hartsville to Spartanburg, from Spartanburg to Georgetown. This exhibit is meaningful for me because it helps to illuminate many of the often overlooked aspects of the struggle for human and civil rights in this nation. And we underscore the critical role of South Carolina. In December of 1964, a teacher and activist named Septima P. Clark, who at that time lived in Charleston, boarded an international flight bound for Oslo, Norway. Ms. Clark once taught here in Columbia at the historic Booker T. Washington High School. She once taught at another school called the Celia Dow Saxon Elementary School, near the intersection of Blossom and Assembly Streets. Today, that space is occupied, ironically, by the Strom Thurmond Wellness Center. But in 1930 and 1940, it was the Celia Dow Saxon School right next to a place some may remember called Gibbs Machinery. Ms. Saxon was a student on the campus of the University of South Carolina during the period of Reconstruction, where she received her teaching certificate. Mrs. Clark was on this international flight accompanying the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he was bound for Oslo to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. When Dr. King accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, he was mindful that much of the focus, many of the headlines about the movement elevated his work and his voice. But on the occasion of receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Dr. King said this: "I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. Most of these people," he said in 1964, "will never make the headlines, and their names will never appear in Who's Who. Yet, when years have rolled past, and when the blazing light of truth is focused on this marvelous age in which we live, men and women will know, and children like my son Joseph, who is here today, they will be taught that our nation is better because of these nameless people who were willing to suffer for righteousness' sake." In the exhibit, Justice for All, we seek to underscore, to amplify the important contributions of the bold, the brilliant, and the brave men who gave rise to what some scholars describe as the Second Reconstruction in this nation. One of those willing to suffer for righteousness' sake was a young man who was a native of Kansas, who later lived in Wyoming, who began his ministry in the Presbyterian Church. But then he said he saw the light, and he became a Unitarian. His name was James Reeb. He was shocked by the poverty he witnessed in Washington, D.C. He relocated to Boston and made ministry among the poor his calling. At one of the sermons he delivered at the All Saints Church in Washington, D.C., James Reeb asked a foreboding question: "Is there nothing worth risking one's life for? And are there no dreams or goals so important that we risk our own destruction to gain them. Years later, after delivering that sermon at the All Saints Church, James Reeb and his wife were watching the nightly news, and they saw what transpired on Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. James Reeb heard Dr. King call upon men and women of the clergy, men and women of conscience who come to Alabama to support these working class men and women who simply sought to have their constitutional rights as citizens recognized, and especially the right to vote. James Reeb was called into action in Alabama. He goes to Selma, and there he's crucified. There James Reeb, 38 years old, the father of four, is assassinated. The day of his death on March 11th of 1965, Dr. King releases a statement and reminds the nation that James Reeb and others were victims. Victims, he said, of a casualty of a moral inclement climate, a climate filled with torrents of hatred and jostling winds of violence. Dr. King had the difficult task in 1965 to deliver a eulogy of this young Unitarian minister. The eulogy, ironically, was delivered at Brown's Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Selma. And in his eulogy, Dr. King echoed words that he had delivered in Oslo. He said, "One day, the history of this great period of social change will be written in all of its completeness. On that bright day, our nation will recognize its real heroes. There will be thousands of dedicated men and women with a noble sense of purpose that enables them to face fury and hostile mobs with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneers." Let me repeat that. What did Dr. King say in tribute to James Reeb and others? One day we will know those who face fury and hostile mobs with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneers. History will one day record the faceless, anonymous young men and women, black and white, who have temporarily left behind the towers of learning to storm the barricades of violence. They are those who are willing to uphold the best in our Judeo-Christian heritage, those who are willing to uphold the best in our democracy. Days after Dr. King's address, a group of 250 African-American students, not far from here, in the town of Orangeburg, South Carolina, they march from a church still standing called Trinity Methodist Church, right across from Claflin University. And they march from Trinity Church to the town square of Orangeburg. And they engage in silent protest and silent prayer in tribute to the 38-year-old Unitarian minister who laid down his life in the pursuit of justice and in the pursuit of voting rights. That same night, President Lyndon Johnson delivers a nationally televised address, motivated and moved by what happened in Selma and what was occurring throughout the Deep South. What he said that day is important as we think about our own struggles now as it relates to voting rights in this country. This is what Lyndon Johnson said days after the tribute to the Reverend James Reeb. The most basic right of all is the right to choose your own leaders. The history of this country, in large measure, is the history of the expansion of that right to all our people. Many of the issues of civil rights are complex and difficult, but about this there can and should be no argument. Every American citizen must have an equal right to vote. There is no reason which can excuse the denial of that right. There is no duty which weighs more heavily on us than the duty we have to ensure that right. So ironic it is that we come today reflecting on history, at the same time elevating groups like the social action ministry of this church, who are reminding us of the connection between our past and our present. The Justice for All exhibit that I mentioned earlier seeks to underscore these men and women who are critical to the struggle for civil rights. One person we lift up is a woman who was a school teacher. Her name was Donella Brown Wilson. Miss Wilson was born in Calhoun County in an area called Fort Mott on the Peterkin Plantation. Miss Wilson, when I met her, was 100 years old. She lived to be 108. I interviewed Miss Wilson once. When I went to see her, I discovered that Miss Wilson was blind and Miss Wilson had difficult hearing. So imagine doing an oral interview with someone who had trouble hearing. But I would pose the question, her daughter would shout the question in her ear. And at 100 years old, upon hearing the question, Miss Wilson would reel off history with encyclopedic memory. And at one point, and remember Miss Wilson could not see well, she leaned into her daughter and said, "Patricia, is he colored?" Patricia was embarrassed. Patricia said, "Yes, Mama, he's African American." She said, "Good." And she said, "Is he a professor at the university?" And Patricia said, "Yes, Mama, he's a professor at the university." So later I learned that Miss Wilson posed this question because in the 1920s, her mother was a housekeeper of the president of the University of South Carolina. And she remembered a time when the only African Americans on that campus were those who wore a uniform as cooks, housekeepers, or yardmen. She said she never fully imagined that one day a colored professor would work at the University of South Carolina. But she began to explain all of what led up to that phenomenal change. She spoke about the demonstrations in Columbia. She spoke about a pioneering man named George Elmore, who challenged the all-white Democratic Party in 1946. She told the story about a woman in 1954 named Sarah Mae Fleming Brown, who challenged bus segregation in Columbia 17 months before the famous Rosa Parks. Miss Wilson told the story about these unknown young men and women on your program. These photographs was taken by a white real estate developer in Columbia named David Wallace, who upon his death, his children found these negatives, and these were negatives of civil rights demonstrations in downtown Columbia. One sign says, "You may jail our bodies, but not our souls." Another says, "Let there be justice for all." These were many of the people who helped shape and move this country. One person I will speak about as I take my seat, and it's important. March 2nd, 1961, 200 students marched from historic Zion Baptist Church near the present Veterans Park. They marched through the streets of Columbia, and they find themselves at the State House. 189 of those persons, students, are arrested. 188 of those students were African American. including a woman named Leola Robinson Simpson, who just retired from the General Assembly, including the Reverend Ida Quincy Newman, the first African-American senator from Richland County since Reconstruction, including a man named Dr. Benjamin Glover, who at the time was the pastor of historic Mother Emanuel Church, including a 21-year-old student from South Carolina State you may have heard of, named James E. Clyburn, now the Majority Whip of the United States Congress. But there was one who stood out among all. His name was Frederick E. Hart. Frederick Hart was a 17-year-old student from the University of South Carolina from Falls Church, Virginia. And as Frederick Hart saw all the crowd gathering on the State House, he moved just a little closer to the crowd, and a policeman saw him and said, are you a member of the NAACP? And Frederick Hart moved a little further and said, yes, I just joined. Well, who is this white student? That was the subject of investigations and surveillance, and they finally realized that he's either a communist or a Unitarian. They investigated, and there were other Unitarians with Frederick Hart that day, including a man named Blake Fishburne. The surveillance showed that they were meeting among the Unitarian Universalist congregation. Frederick Hart was roundly ridiculed on that day when he got back to campus. But Frederick Hart, undaunted by the ridicule, at 17 years old, wrote down a letter as he prepared to leave campus. The letter said, "Sympathizing is not enough. I beg you to stand up for what you believe is right. This situation of Jim Crow racial injustice is appallingly unjust. To let it go on would be defeating the whole purpose of democracy. If you're ever going to stand up now." March of 1961. As we now look at the terrain around us, as we now find an active campaign of voter suppression in this country, as we think about some of this history being deliberately buried and obscured, conflated with this idea of critical race theory, if we're ever going to stand up now. One young man who stood up with Frederick Hart in 1961 was a young man who I got to know named Hayes Mizell, who recently passed away after 60 years of being on the front lines of change. Hayes Mizell was investigated in 1961, and SLED said, "This student is an avowed liberal, an integrationist, and Unitarian." This is what they said about your congregation in 1961. A reporter said, "I have further information with reference to this Unitarian group. The professors at the university who are members, and I sincerely believe that it forms a very definite pattern from which we can expect trouble in the future, unless some action is taken. Brothers and sisters of the Unitarian congregation, keep on fighting and seeking good trouble." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Our closing hymn is number 1014, which is in your teal book, and Kevin will lead us.
I invite you to join me in singing this old song in a new way. Number 1014, the songwriter Jason Shelton has asked us all to sing it with new words in an effort to be more inclusive, more active, and less ableist. You can please stand as you are willing. And number 1014, Answering the Call of Love. I invite you each time you get to the chorus, instead of singing the words you see printed, we'll be changing them to "We are answering the call of love." Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim, we are answering the call of love.
The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide, and so every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. Hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim, we are answering the call of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim, we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim, we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Thank you. Please be seated. Our closing words are from Annie Dillard. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. We now extinguish the chalice.
I invite you to stand and join in singing our congregational benediction. May the blessings of Lord be upon us. May the power of love direct us. And may the peace of this community sustain us.
I'd like to welcome again the visitors who were brave enough to introduce themselves, Bill and Jeff. This concludes our service, and thank you again for joining us. You are welcome to stay and enjoy light refreshments. Please adjourn to the social hall, grab a quick drink and snacks, and preferably go outside to do your visiting. So to those of you here in the sanctuary and those watching on YouTube streaming, we'll see you next week, right here. Thank you.